Ever get rejected for something, like a job, and then find out you were their second choice? Does that sting more or less?
Yeah, I've definitely been in that situation a few times.
Well, get this.
Okay.
Today, we're going to dive into some really cool neuroscience research. It's from a paper published just this year.
Oh, wow. So cutting edge.
Yeah, super recent.
Nice.
And it was in PNAS, so pretty big deal. You know what? This research actually sheds light on that exact feeling we were just talking about.
Like the second choice thing?
Yeah, like how our brains actually process that kind of social experience.
So fascinating.
It turns out our brains can separate whether we got what we wanted and how much the other person values us, even if they couldn't pick us.
Like even if we weren't the winner.
Exactly.
Wow.
So it's like two separate things happening in our brains at the same time.
That makes sense because sometimes you can just tell.
You didn't get picked, but you can tell they really wanted to.
Exactly.
And that feels way different than just being like totally rejected.
Right. It's more nuanced.
Yeah, it's like, okay, they like me, but there were these other constraints.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
So these researchers at USC, they designed this really clever matching game. So in the game, you're trying to get picked by other players.
I see. So like a social experiment type of thing?
Exactly.
Cool.
But here's the twist. They could actually isolate those two things in the brain, like the joy of winning.
Right.
And how much the other person values you. So they could see what lit up when someone was picked, but ranked low, versus someone who wasn't picked, but was ranked highly by the person choosing.
That's smart, because in the real world, those two things are often linked.
Totally. So it's hard to tease them apart.
Yeah, like usually if someone picks you, it's because they like you.
But this way they can see what happens when those things don't line up.
Exactly.
I'm really curious to hear what they found.
Well, they found that some of the parts of our brains that usually light up with pain,
Oh, like the ouch, that hurts.
those regions are actually busy updating how much we think someone values us.
So it's not just about the immediate rejection.
It's more complex than that.
It's like your brain is trying to figure out where you stand with someone. So even if it feels like, ouch, they didn't pick me, there's a whole other process happening at the same time. It's trying to make sense of the bigger picture.
It's like our brains are constantly doing all this social calculus behind the scenes without us even realizing it.
I know. It makes you wonder what else is going on in there that we're not aware of.
So we've established that our brains are running these two separate calculations. But here's the question I keep coming back to. How do we actually use this knowledge in our everyday lives? Like, what does it mean for us?
Well, first off, just knowing about this tendency for our brains to kind of overemphasize positive outcomes that can help us be more mindful in our interactions.
So like, if someone keeps picking me for their team, I should pause and think, is it because they really value my skills? Or are they just obsessed with winning?
Exactly. It's like, do they actually like me, or are they just using me to get what they want?
That's such a good point.
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of being chosen, but it's important to step back and consider the bigger picture.
Like, what are their true motivations?
Yeah.
And on the flip side, when we feel rejected or left out, this research suggests we should ask ourselves, is this really about how this person feels about me? Or am I just bummed because I didn't get what I wanted?
That's a really important distinction.
Right.
Because sometimes we can misinterpret things. Like, we might think someone doesn't like us, but really they just had other priorities in that moment.
It's like separating our emotional reaction from what's actually happening.
Exactly, because our emotions can be powerful and they can cloud our judgment.
It's like we need to take a step back and be like, brain, chill out for a sec.
Right. Like, let's look at this rationally.
Exactly.
And see what's really going on.
Think about friendships.
Okay.
Let's say your friend cancels plans last minute.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
It's the worst.
Yeah.
But does one canceled dinner mean they don't value our friendship?
Probably not.
Right. Like if they had a good reason.
Yeah, like their kid got sick. You wouldn't automatically assume they were blowing you off.
Right. But if it became a pattern and it's like, maybe something's up.
Exactly.
So it's all about looking at the big picture, the long-term patterns of behavior.
Right.
Not just getting caught up in one event.
Like one canceled dinner doesn't mean the friendship is over. But if they're consistently flaking on you, it's a different story.
Right. That's when we need to pay attention to those relational value signals.
Exactly.
And remember, this applies to positive interactions too.
Yeah, for sure.
Like if someone is consistently choosing to include us, that's a good sign that they value us. right? It shows they enjoy our company and want us around. So it sounds like finding the right balance is key. We want to be aware that our brains can sometimes trick us, but we also don't want to be cynical.
Right, like you don't want to assume everyone has ulterior motives. It's about finding that sweet spot between being realistic and being open to connection.
I love that.
It's a delicate balance, but it's so worth striving for.
Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to that concept of representational similarity analysis.
RSA.
So the study found that our brain patterns are more similar when we're treated similarly by others.
Interesting.
And that those brain patterns match our self-reported feelings about those people later on.
Oh, wow. That's so cool.
What does that mean for us in practical terms?
That's one of the most fascinating findings from this study, I think.
Yeah.
It suggests that our brains aren't just like passively tracking this social information.
Like outcome versus value.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But they're actually using that information to create like this map of our social world.
So it's like our brain is keeping a record of all our relationships and where each person stands in terms of how much they value us.
Like it's constantly updating this internal ranking system. It's like having this personalized social GPS.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. It's guiding us through the complex world of relationships.
So it's not a static map.
No, definitely not.
It's constantly evolving as we have new experiences with people.
Exactly. It's a dynamic system that's always learning and adapting. It makes you realize how sophisticated our brains really are.
Right. Like we're walking around with these supercomputers in our heads, constantly analyzing and processing our social interactions.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it. And you know what's really interesting? Those initial impressions, those early data points, they can be really powerful.
You mean like first impressions really do matter?
More than we might realize.
Wow.
Because our brains are wired to seek out patterns and create coherence. So those early interactions can really set the stage.
So we're essentially building on the foundation of those initial assessments of relational value, both positive and negative.
Right. So if someone is really kind and welcoming when you first meet them, you're more likely to see their future actions in a positive light.
Even if they mess up sometimes.
Exactly. You'll give them the benefit of the doubt.
But if someone is rude or dismissive right off the bat, it's going to be harder to see them in a positive light later on.
Absolutely.
Even if they try to make amends.
It's like that initial impression creates a bias that can be hard to overcome.
So it's like we're constantly updating our internal map. But those early interactions carry a lot of weight.
They do. They really shape how we see the world. It makes you want to be extra mindful of those first encounters.
Totally.
Because you never know what kind of impact they might have.
It's like we're all leaving these little footprints in each other's brains. Every interaction matters.
Absolutely.
All of this is incredibly insightful.
I'm glad you're finding it helpful.
I feel like I'm already starting to see my own relationships in a new light.
That's the power of understanding the inner workings of our brains. It allows us to become more aware of the subtle forces at play in our interactions.
And ultimately make more informed choices about our relationships.
Exactly. It's like we're taking control of our social lives.
Instead of just letting our brains run on autopilot, we're becoming more conscious and intentional.
And that's a really empowering feeling. It's like we're finally understanding the user manual for our brains.
I love that. So instead of trying to completely rewire our brains, we're learning to fine-tune the system we already have.
Exactly. We're working with what we've got, using it to our advantage.
It's all about optimization.
Totally.
Making our brains work for us.
Like we're becoming social hackers. We're cracking the code of human connection.
That's a great way to put it.
We're figuring out the algorithms that drive our relationships. It really is remarkable how much our brains are doing behind the scenes to help us navigate the social world.
Every time we interact with someone, we should ask ourselves, is this about the outcome or is this about how much this person really values me? It's like a little mental checklist we can use to keep ourselves in check.
Because our brains can be sneaky, always trying to find those rewards.
And sometimes that can lead us astray. We challenge you to pay attention to those two tracks of information this week.
Outcome versus value.
See if you can spot the moments where your brain might be tricking you.
It's a fun little experiment.
It really is.
And it can make a big difference in your relationships.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those connections strong.